Hello, English enthusiasts. Welcome to Story-Driven English, where we learn English through vibrant stories from our modern world. Today, we're diving into a special story called Voices of Dissent, a journey through the 2025 protests. This isn't just any ordinary tale. It's an emotional journey through America's largest wave of protests in 2025. But before we begin, have you ever wondered what happens when ordinary citizens stand up against the most powerful people in the world? When young reporter Sarah Chen accidentally documents a historic moment as millions of protesters take to the streets simultaneously, she uncovers a shocking secret the government is trying to hide, one that could completely change the nation's direction. This story won't just enhance your English vocabulary around politics and social issues, but also delivers profound lessons about democracy, justice, and the power of collective voices. And who knows, you might one day need these exact words to describe similar events in real life. If you're looking for practical, vibrant English that connects with contemporary issues, this video is for you. And hey, if you enjoy our storytelling approach to teaching English, don't hesitate to hit that subscribe button and notification bell to catch our next captivating stories. Every week we have new language experiences exclusively for our story-driven English community. Now, sit back, grab your notebook if you wish, and let's step into the dramatic world of Sarah Chen and the hands-off protests. Sarah Chen adjusted her camera strap as she walked briskly through the crowded streets of Washington, D.C. The morning air was crisp and filled with anticipation. As a junior reporter for the Global Chronicle, this assignment was her big break, covering what promised to be the largest wave of protests since President Donald Trump began his second term in January 2025. "This is going to be epic," she whispered to herself, checking her recorder for the fifth time. Sarah had been tracking the growing movement online for weeks. The hands-off protests were scheduled to take place simultaneously across all 50 states and even internationally. Her editor had chosen her specifically because of her previous coverage of grassroots movements. The National Mall was already filling with people by 9 a.m. Colorful signs bobbed above the crowd like buoys in a human sea. "Hands off our democracy. Protect Social Security. No billionaire takeover." Sarah snapped photographs as she moved through the gathering crowd, capturing the diverse faces of dissent. A tall man with gray hair and kind eyes caught her attention. He wore a veteran's cap adorned with pins and badges from different eras of service. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah approached him. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Global Chronicle. Would you mind telling me why you're here today?" The man smiled, extending his hand. "James Wilson, former Marine Corps. Served for 22 years. His handshake was firm and confident. "I'm here because I took an oath once to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Never thought I'd have to worry so much about the domestic part." Sarah nodded, recording his words. "What specifically concerns you about the current administration?" James adjusted his cap. "Where do I start? The Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they call it, has fired over 200,000 federal employees in just 3 months. These aren't just numbers. They're people with families and mortgages. My daughter-in-law was one of them, worked for the EPA for 15 years. Got a text message telling her not to come in on Monday." "A text message?" He shook his head in disbelief. As Sarah jotted notes, a young woman approached them, carrying a sign that read, "Hands off our future." Her toddler sat in a stroller decorated with small American flags. "May I join this conversation?" the woman asked. I couldn't help overhearing. "Of course," Sarah replied. "And you are?" "I'm Melissa Phillips. This is my son, Ethan. He's 15 months old." She adjusted the sunshade on the stroller. "I wanted him to be here today, even though he won't remember it. Someday I'll tell him he was part of history." "Why was it important to bring him?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Melissa looked down at her son, who was contentedly playing with a small toy. "In our family, we stand up to bullies. That's what I want to teach him. And honestly, I'm terrified about what kind of country he'll grow up in if we don't speak out now." Sarah took a photo of Melissa and Ethan with permission. "What specifically brought you out today?" "The library cuts hit us hard," Melissa explained. "Our local branch had to cancel all the children's programs because of federal funding cuts. Storytime was where Ethan made his first friends." She paused. "But it's more than that. It's the tariffs that are making everything more expensive, the attacks on immigrant families in our community, the dismantling of protections for transgender kids. It feels like we're moving backward at lightning speed." The crowd around them continued to grow. Sarah noticed a group of people in matching blue T-shirts making their way through the throng. "Federal Workers United," they chanted, their voices rising above the general murmur. Sarah excused herself from James and Melissa to approach the group. Their shirts read, "Feds Matter," in bold white letters. "Hi there," she called out to a woman who appeared to be leading the chants. "Can I ask you a few questions about why you're protesting today?" The woman looked at Sarah's press badge and nodded. "I'm Diana Ortiz, Department of Labor, or at least I was until last Friday." Her voice carried a mixture of anger and determination. 23 years of service, and I got an email saying my position had been optimized out of existence. That's the actual phrase they used. "I'm sorry to hear that," Sarah said. "How many of you have lost your jobs?" Diana gestured to the group around her. "All of us. We're just a small fraction of the thousands of federal workers who've been cut. And it's not just about our jobs, it's about the services we provide. Who's going to process Social Security claims now? Who's going to inspect food safety? Who's going to answer the phones when veterans call about their benefits?" A man standing next to Diana jumped in. "It's that billionaire Elon Musk. He has no business running a government department. What does he know about public service? His Doge initiative is just a way to gut the government and hand more power to his rich friends." Sarah recognized an opportunity to explore the other major target of the day's protests. Many of the signs here mention Musk alongside President Trump. Why do you think he's become such a lightning rod for criticism? Diana crossed her arms. "Because he's the face of this whole government-slashing campaign. The president gave him this made-up position to basically dismantle decades of public infrastructure. And he does it with these smug tweets about efficiency and taxpayer savings. But you know who suffers? Not him or his billionaire buddies. It's regular Americans who depend on government services." As Sarah continued interviewing the federal workers, the crowd swelled around the main stage. Volunteers in bright yellow vests moved through the masses, passing out water bottles and helping people find spaces to stand. The atmosphere vibrated with a mix of anger and purpose. Sarah checked her phone and saw messages from her editor. Similar scenes were unfolding in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and hundreds of smaller cities across the country. The hands-off movement was living up to its anticipated scale. She made her way toward the stage, where organizers were setting up microphones and testing the sound system. A young woman with curly hair and a clipboard was directing volunteers, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Excuse me," Sarah approached her. "I'm with the Global Chronicle. Is there someone I could speak with about how this event came together?" The woman barely glanced up from her clipboard. "That would be me. Maya Johnson, lead coordinator for Hands Off DC. But I've literally got about 2 minutes before we start." "I'll be quick," Sarah promised. "How did you manage to organize something of this scale?" Maya finally looked at Sarah directly, a hint of pride breaking through her stressed expression. "Social media, grassroots networks, and a lot of very angry people. We've been building this coalition for months: labor unions, civil rights groups, environmental activists, LGBTQ+ advocates, veterans. When you have a common enemy, it's amazing how quickly people can unite." "And what's the main message you hope to send today?" "It's right there in our name: hands off. Hands off our democracy, hands off our civil service, hands off our social safety net, hands off our rights." Maya checked her watch. "We're not just here to complain. We're here to show that there's massive opposition to what's happening, and we're not going to be silent while our country is dismantled for profit." A commotion near the stage interrupted their conversation. A small group of counter-protesters had arrived, wearing red caps and carrying American flags. The tension in the air immediately thickened. Maya sighed. "I've got to handle this. Our marshals will make sure there's no confrontation." As Maya hurried away, Sarah watched the yellow-vested marshals form a human barrier between the main crowd and the counter-protesters. Their training was evident in their calm demeanor as they created space while avoiding escalation. Sarah approached the counter-protest group cautiously, her journalistic instincts pushing her to get both sides of the story. A young man in his 20s stood at the edge of the small group, his red cap pulled low over his eyes. "Excuse me," Sarah began. "I'm covering today's events for the Global Chronicle. Would you be willing to share why you're here today?" The man seemed surprised at being addressed. "Sure, I guess. I'm Kyle from Ohio. I'm here because somebody needs to stand up for the president. These people act like he's destroying America, but he's actually saving it. The government was too big and too wasteful, and now it's finally being fixed. What would you say to the federal workers who've lost their jobs?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone neutral. Kyle shrugged. "That's just part of making things more efficient. The private sector can do most of those jobs better anyway. And honestly, most people I know back home think it's great that someone's finally draining the swamp for real." Their conversation was cut short as speakers began addressing the main crowd. Sarah thanked Kyle and moved back toward the stage, where a diverse lineup of speakers, community leaders, union representatives, faith leaders, and affected citizens, took turns at the microphone. A middle-aged woman in a wheelchair rolled onto the stage to thunderous applause. She introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Rivera, a disability rights advocate. "When I heard that the Social Security Administration offices in my city were closing," she proclaimed, her voice strong despite her frail appearance, "I wasn't just worried for myself. I thought about the thousands of elderly and disabled Americans who rely on those in-person services. Not everyone can navigate a website or wait on hold for hours." The crowd responded with supportive cheers and raised signs. "The administration says they're making government more efficient," Dr. Rivera continued. "But what they really mean is they're making it more difficult for vulnerable people to access services they've paid for throughout their working lives. That's not efficiency, that's cruelty disguised as fiscal responsibility." The speeches continued as Sarah circulated through the crowd, gathering more stories. She met teachers worried about education cuts, environmental activists concerned about the gutting of the EPA, healthcare workers alarmed by changes to Medicare, and immigrants fearful of the increased deportation raids. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah checked her social media feeds and saw that the protests had gone global. Images poured in from London, Berlin, Paris, and other major cities where American expatriates and international supporters had gathered in solidarity. In Berlin, protesters had assembled outside a Tesla showroom, carrying signs criticizing Musk's role in the administration. "No one elected you, Elon," read one sign held by an American student studying abroad. Another sign, carried by a German supporter, declared, "Even dogs against Doge," with a picture of a disgruntled pug. Sarah smiled at the creativity of the protesters while continuing to document the Washington event. The diversity of the crowd struck her. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds had united under the "Hands Off" banner. Late in the afternoon, a group of musicians took the stage, leading the crowd in songs of protest and resistance. The mood shifted from angry determination to a spirit of solidarity and hope. Sarah found herself humming along to a folk song about standing together against powerful forces. As the sun began to set over the National Mall, casting long shadows across the crowd, Sarah spotted an elderly couple sitting on a bench near the edge of the gathering. They looked tired but content, holding hands as they watched the proceedings. "May I join you?" Sarah asked, approaching them with a smile. The woman patted the space beside her. "Of course, dear. I'm Beverly, and this is my husband Al. We've been married 57 years. "That's impressive," Sarah said, sitting down. "What brought you two out today?" Al chuckled, his weathered face crinkling with amusement. "Well, when you get to our age, you've seen a few things. We were too young for the Vietnam protests, though we supported them, but we marched for civil rights in the 60s. Then life happened, careers, kids, grandkids. We thought our marching days were over." "What changed?" Sarah asked. Beverly's expression grew serious. "We couldn't sit this one out. Not when so much is at stake. My Social Security check is what keeps us afloat. AL's Medicare coverage is what keeps him alive after his heart surgery last year. When we heard about the cuts and closures, we knew we had to speak up, not just for ourselves, but for our grandchildren." Al nodded in agreement. "I voted Republican most of my life," you know. Supported Reagan, both Bushes. But this isn't conservatism, it's destruction. They're not building anything better, they're just tearing down what generations have built. As they spoke, Sarah noticed a commotion near the main stage. People were pointing at their phones and talking excitedly. "Something's happening," she said, standing up to get a better view. A speaker rushed to the microphone. "We're getting reports that the IRS has just announced it's pausing its planned layoffs pending further review. This comes after today's massive show of public opposition." The crowd erupted in cheers. It was a small victory, but in that moment it felt significant, proof that their voices were being heard. Sarah quickly checked her news feeds and confirmed the report. The administration had indeed announced a temporary pause to reassess staffing needs at the IRS. While carefully worded to avoid admitting a direct response to the protests, the timing was unmistakable. The energy in the crowd surged with renewed purpose. As darkness fell, thousands of cell phone flashlights illuminated the National Mall, creating a sea of light that spelled out "hands off" when viewed from above, a moment perfectly designed for aerial news footage. Sarah stayed until the very end, watching as volunteers meticulously cleaned up trash and helped elderly participants find transportation home. The protesters were determined to leave no trace and give critics no ammunition to dismiss them as disrespectful or disorderly. As she prepared to file her story, Sarah realized she hadn't eaten all day. She found a small cafe still open near her hotel and ordered a sandwich, reviewing her notes and photographs while waiting for her food. The television above the bar was tuned to a news channel showing scenes from the day's protests around the country. The ticker at the bottom of the screen reported that White House sources were downplaying the significance of the demonstrations, characterizing them as predictable tantrums from the radical left. Sarah rolled her eyes, thinking about the diverse array of Americans she'd interviewed throughout the day. Hardly a monolithic radical left, by any definition. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. President Trump spends day golfing in Florida while protests sweep nation. The split screen showed protesters marching in the rain in cities across America juxtaposed with footage of the president on his private golf course in Jupiter, Florida. The cafe owner, who had been wiping down tables nearby, stopped to watch the broadcast. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "People are losing their jobs, can't afford groceries because of his tariffs, and he's golfing." Sarah's journalistic instincts kicked in. "Were you affected by the tariffs?" she asked. The man turned to her. "Are you kidding? I run a small business. My costs are up 20% in the last month alone. Coffee, bread, everything I import. I either have to raise my prices and lose customers or eat the costs and barely survive." He shook his head. "And I'm one of the lucky ones. My cousin's factory just laid off half their workers because of the steel tariffs." Sarah added these observations to her notes. The economic impact of the administration's policies was creating ripples far beyond the federal workforce. Back in her hotel room later that night, Sarah began writing her feature article, trying to capture the scale and significance of what she'd witnessed. As she organized her material, patterns emerged from the diverse stories she'd collected. Ordinary Americans from all walks of life united by concern for their country's direction and determined to make their voices heard. Her phone buzzed with a message from her editor. "Great photos. Need 1,500 words by midnight. Focus on human stories and global aspect. Sarah typed furiously, weaving together the narratives of James the veteran, Melissa and her toddler, Diana and the federal workers, Maya the organizer, the elderly couple, and others she'd met throughout the day. She highlighted the international dimension of the protests and the small victory regarding the IRS layoffs. She concluded, as the hands-off demonstrations disperse, their impact remains to be determined. But for one day at least, thousands of Americans transformed their individual concerns into a collective voice, a voice too loud to be easily dismissed or ignored. After submitting her article, Sarah scrolled through her social media feeds one last time before bed. Videos and images from the day's events dominated her timeline. A viral clip showed protesters in Boston singing, "This land is your land," while a counter-protester tried unsuccessfully to disrupt them, only to find himself joining in the chorus by the end. Another trending video featured an interview with an 11-year-old girl at the Chicago protest who eloquently explained why she was marching. "I learned in school that democracy means government by the people. But if the government stops listening to the people, is it still a democracy? That's why I'm here, to remind them to listen." Sarah smiled at the young girl's wisdom as she set her phone aside and turned off the light. Something told her this was just the beginning of a significant movement. Whether it would ultimately change the administration's course remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: the American tradition of peaceful protest was alive and well. The next morning, Sarah woke early and headed to a local diner for breakfast before catching her train home. The place was buzzing with conversation about yesterday's events. At a nearby table, an older man in a business suit was engaged in heated debate with a younger woman in scrubs, clearly coming off a night shift at a hospital. "These protests won't change anything," the man insisted. "The president has the mandate to reshape government however he sees fit. That's why he won the election." The woman in scrubs leaned forward. "A mandate isn't a blank check. Winning an election doesn't mean you can just dismantle everything without consequences. Democracy doesn't end at the ballot box." Sarah smiled to herself as she sipped her coffee, listening to democracy in action over breakfast. The debate was passionate but civil, exactly the kind of conversation the country needed. Her phone pinged with a notification. Her article had been published. She quickly scanned it, pleased to see that her editor had kept most of her original text intact. The headline read, "Voices of Dissent Inside the Global Hands-Off Movement." As she finished her breakfast and prepared to leave, the television in the diner showed footage of new protests forming outside Social Security offices across the country. The movement was continuing, evolving from a single day of action into something more sustained. Sarah paid her bill and headed for the train station, already thinking about follow-up stories. The protests might not immediately change policy, but they had undeniably changed the conversation. People who had felt isolated in their concerns were discovering they weren't alone. And in a democracy, that realization could be powerful indeed. On the train platform, Sarah noticed a woman wearing a "hands-off" button. Their eyes met, and they exchanged knowing smiles, two strangers connected by the shared experience of witnessing democracy in its most direct and vibrant form. As her train pulled away from Washington, D.C., Sarah watched the Capitol dome recede into the distance. Whatever happened next, She knew she had been present for a significant moment in American history, a moment when ordinary citizens reclaimed their voice in the national conversation. She opened her notebook and began planning her next article. The story was far from over. Key vocabulary, repeated throughout. Protest, a public expression of objection, disapproval, or dissent. Demonstration, a public display of group opinion, especially one made by a mass gathering. Rally, a mass meeting of people for a common purpose. Administration, the executive branch of a government. Dissent, to hold or express opinions that differ from those commonly or officially held. Federal worker, a person employed by the national government. Solidarity, unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest. Tariffs, taxes imposed on imported goods. Democracy, a system of government in which power is vested in the people. Social Security, a government program that provides economic assistance to persons faced with unemployment, disability, or old age. Civil rights, the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. Grassroots, ordinary people regarded as the main body of an organization's membership. Mandate, the authority to carry out a policy, regarded as given by the electorate to a party or candidate that wins an election. Billionaire, a person possessing assets worth at least $1 billion. Coalition, a temporary alliance for combined action, especially of political parties. Efficiency, the state or quality of being efficient, achieving maximum productivity with minimum wasted effort. Downsizing, the reduction in size of a workforce. Opposition, resistance or dissent, expressed in action or argument. Impact, the effect or influence of one person, thing, or action on another. Movement, a group of people working together to advance their shared political, social, or artistic ideas. And there we have it, friends, the powerful story of Sarah Chen and the 2025 hands-off protests. Just as those protesters found their collective voice, I hope this story has helped strengthen your English voice too. So, what did you think? Did any particular characters resonate with you? Perhaps James the veteran, Melissa with her toddler, or the elderly couple who thought their protesting days were behind them. I'd love to know which vocabulary words you found most useful. Drop them in the comments below. Speaking of voices being heard, if this story spoke to you, why not let your voice be heard by hitting that like button? It's your own little protest against boring English learning methods. And just as the protesters spread their message across borders, you can spread quality English learning by sharing this video with friends who are on their language journey. Remember what Maya the organizer said, when you have a common enemy, it's amazing how quickly people can unite. Well, our common enemy is complicated English, and by subscribing to Story-Driven English, you're joining a community united in the pursuit of natural, context-rich language learning. Oh, and if you're wondering what happened to Sarah Chen after this assignment, or whether the protests ultimately changed government policy, subscribe and ring that notification bell. Let's just say her journalistic adventures don't end here, and neither does your English learning journey with us. As Sarah opened her notebook to plan her next article, we're already planning our next story for you. Democracy might not end at the ballot box, and English learning doesn't end when the video stops. Until next time, this is Story-Driven English, where every word has a purpose, every story builds your skills, and every subscriber becomes part of our growing movement. See you in our next linguistic adventure.